Hello, everyone. Welcome to Memory Lab Introduction to Audiovisual Preservation. This is the fourth webinar in a series of 8 intended to help build and strengthen a network of memory labs in California. Many thanks to the California State Library for supporting this series and for establishing a new CopyCat grant program to build and support memory labs in the state. My name is Pamela Vadakan. I'm the director of California Revealed, which is a California State Library initiative that helps public libraries and other local heritage groups digitize, preserve, and make available online collections related to the state's history and culture. And our very special guest today is Shahed Dowlatshahi, who is California Revealed's beloved audiovisual preservation manager. And he's going to lead us through this training. And yeah, I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shahed Dowlatshahi. I'm the Audiovisual Preservation Manager at California Revealed. Very happy to be with you all here today and to be part of this exciting project. I graduated with a master's degree in Moving Image Archiving and Preservation from New York University in 2016, and I've been working in this field since then. At California Revealed, I work with my colleagues Willow and Pamela to assist cultural heritage institutions across California digitize, preserve, and provide access to their audiovisual material.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is a reminder, like I said, that this is a series that we're doing through mid-August. And all of these sessions are optional, but of course we do hope you'll attend consecutively because the sessions tend to build on each other. For instance, next month, we're going to get a little bit deeper into equipment setups again with Shahed and troubleshoot a little bit as well as we can virtually. So we do hope you'll come to that one, and then we'll move on to training staff and evaluation. And we'll record each one so you can always watch a review later, but we would love to have you participate in the room with us. So the links to register are at californiarevealed.org/memorylabs. And I did want to give a big shout out to the Memory Lab Network, which this training is based upon. It's designed by Siobhan Hagen, who's the project director for the network. She's not here today, but she's definitely here in spirit. But please feel free to dive into their website, memorylabnetwork.github.io, because there's just so many more resources there that we'll touch upon, but there's just so much more available there. So I definitely wanted to point you to that. Next slide, please. And we have a couple of brown bags coming up before the next webinar in May, just to get to know each other a little bit better in another Zoom meeting, but hopefully we'll have more time to introduce each other, talk about your plans, where you are with your memory lab. The first one will be April 20th for the CopyCat grantees only, those who received a CopyCat grant this year. And then the following Tuesday will be open for anyone interested in memory labs, interested in applying for CopyCat grant, or if you're in the midst of building one now, or you have one set up, it would be wonderful just to share resources. Thank you. So Shahed, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Pamela, for that introduction and information. Let's get started. This webinar will cover basic principles for audiovisual preservation, preservation planning for both you, library staff out there who are maintaining audiovisual collections, as well as for your patrons. With in-person instruction and online resources, you can transfer these basic principles to them so they can take care of their family collections at home. First, I want to present a list of the main concepts that we are going to talk about today. We'll start by talking about audiovisual formats in general, which will situate us in the massive world of audiovisual preservation. And then we'll focus on particular formats and aspects of preserving them. Then we'll move on to talk about digitization, since basically digitization is the only way we have to preserve audiovisual material on analog and obsolete formats. formats today, with some rare exceptions. We'll also talk about metadata, quality control, and the long-term digital preservation of your digital files that result from this process. We all have audiovisual material in our collections, and most of this material is going to be on formats that are now obsolete. When we talk about audiovisual material today and preserving them, we are basically talking about digitizing this material, reformatting them from tape-based or film-based audiovisual information to digital file-based audiovisual information. We digitize because we have these tapes and films and discs, but the technology landscape no longer includes playing tapes on decks or films on projectors. So for these audiovisual memories, history, and culture that are stored on obsolete material to continue to live, we basically need to reformat them from their current physical, unplayable, deteriorating formats to digital files. So in the simplest sense today, we are talking about digitizing audiovisual material. Of course, there are other considerations beyond the digitization process that we'll dig into. And it's important to note that the preservation of audiovisual objects is not limited to the digitization of obsolete analog formats. Millions of hours of audiovisual material are being produced around the world daily on digital formats via cell phones and digital cameras and audio recorders. And all of this material also has its unique considerations. But here, since we are talking about memory labs, we will mostly focus on the preservation of obsolete audiovisual material. Much of will require digitization. And this is not to say that memory labs can't be a site where people also preserve their born digital material that might originate on cell phones that are going out of uh, the current technology landscape, and digital cameras that are not functioning with the current technology anymore, etc. Okay, before we start talking about formats more specifically, I think it's good to think of any preservation project from a higher level and answer some basic questions that will help with planning. In any audiovisual preservation project, we want to start with the considerations of access and preservation and decide on the importance of each before starting the digitization process. Perhaps your project is fully geared towards preservation and you're not at this point thinking about providing access to the material. Or perhaps your ultimate goal is making the material accessible and you're not centering preservation. Ideally, and with some good planning and knowledge, you will be able to digitize your material and satisfy both preservation and access requirements. And the main decision I'm talking about here are the types of digital files that you generate from your digitization process. Are you generating a set of preservation files and another set of access files? Which format each set of files be in? How large will they be? And will you be able to store them? Will the access files play on your access platform? These are examples of some of the questions to think about. Some other good questions to start out this planning phase include, specifically for memory labs, how will the final digital files be used? Will they be used for online streaming like we do at California Revealed? And do you plan to contribute your memory labs files to California Revealed if the patron is willing to share them? Or will the files be used by the family who created the material, and will they want to kind of share them in any particular way with others in their circle? Having a clear idea of the use cases of your digitized audiovisual works will clarify the workflow, the deliverables, and the ongoing digital preservation work. Here are some fundamentals that you should think about before starting a digitization project. These were reviewed during the last webinar as well, so you can refer to that webinar for more detailed. These fundamentals were built upon the Memory Lab Network's training fundamentals, and they exist in all digitization workflows, whether you are digitizing a still photograph, a VHS tape, or an audio tape. Analog to digital signal conversion, assessing your collection, as well as working with patrons to inventory what they have and deciding what is important to digitize and save, determining standards such as resolution and file types, calibration, signal tests and targets, embedding metadata, quality control, and digital preservation, some of which we'll get into here more and some of which were more covered in the last webinar. I include access in this list as part of the process that goes hand in hand with preservation, like an incentive. And at California Revealed, we are excited to make collective California histories available online for the public's education and enjoyment. And if the patrons at Memory Labs are willing to share their personal archives, you may want to consider making Memory Lab files available on your site and through our program. As you know, these rich personal memories could often hold a lot of great information for public users and researchers as well. The very first step in any audiovisual preservation project for institutions as well as for individuals should be the creation of an inventory. Whether you are preserving audiovisual material in a memory lab, through an outside vendor, or on a mass scale, or only a few tapes, you should start by gathering some basic pieces of information on the objects. Some of this information will be about the physical material, like format, duration, and condition. Some will be about the content, like the title, the date of creation, the subject, the genre, etc. And we'll talk about these different pieces of metadata that you'd need to collect about the files that you create as a result of the digitization process as well. So that's another set of metadata, is the metadata that you collect about digital files that result in the end. In the last webinar, we shared some basic inventory and intake sheets from the Tulare County Library and the Los Angeles Public Library that you can use as a model for your memory lab to collect this basic information from your patrons. Information like format, title, unique identifiers, etc. It's important to identify what you have in your collections before starting a digitization process. You'll want to start with a basic inventory like we mentioned. Use a simple spreadsheet like an Excel or Google Sheets and capture some basic information like content description based on labels or writing on the tapes and films could be very helpful information to include in this. An approximate date of creation, if you have that information, the material type, whether it's image, text, moving image, audio, generation, whether it's the tape that was originally recorded in the camera, which is always what we want to digitize if available, or whether it's a copy because we don't have the original. You want to note the condition, the creator, location, etc. In order to calculate storage costs, record the format and extent very clearly. So, depending on what format you're talking about, you want to include the dimensions or the number of pages or the duration. Condition notes will be helpful to anticipate any kind of special handling that the material might need, which could take extra time and resources. We've included in the resources guide, California Revealed's audiovisual format guide, which can help you identify particular audiovisual formats. One of the main challenges with the inventory of audiovisual material specifically is that we are not able to view the content a lot of the times. We might, with manuscripts and newspaper collections, we might be able to get accurate inventory information just by looking at the objects. But with the tapes and films, a lot of time we can't play back the tapes or films to get that accurate information. So we often lean on two sources. One is previous inventories that will hopefully have been created at the time that the material was created or at the time that the archive ingested the material. And two is from the containers of the tapes and the films themselves. So, whatever label is written on there, and this is likely to be the best source in the context of memory labs. Um, it is really important to encourage everyone dealing with audiovisual material to actually not play back any of these tapes or film, so even if they have access to the playback equipment and know how to work them. This is because that playback might be the last chance to play that tape or film, and that last play should be saved for potential digitization rather than playing it back to, fill in your inventory or complete your inventory. So rely on written information on the tapes in previous inventories as opposed to trying to play back the material to get that information. And in some cases, you don't even want to be playing back tapes or films in your memory lab for digitization because the material might be in really bad condition. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but if tapes are suffering from mold or sticky shed syndrome or any kind of really visible deterioration, you don't want to put that in your deck and try to digitize it because it's going to damage your deck and your whole setup. Those tapes should be really going to a specialized folks that know how to clean and repair them and get them ready for their playback. I want to start talking about audiovisual formats now, and depending on how you look at it, there are dozens or hundreds of audiovisual formats, and I couldn't think of a better way to introduce the idea of the depth and variety of audiovisual formats than to share this video from the Bay Area Video Coalition. So let's take a look.
Through your collection, you'll likely notice an array of different formats. Each different format will require slightly different treatment, so it's important to be able to distinguish them. In a lot of AV collections, you'll find the following formats. Motion picture film. Film is the original format for moving images. Printed on either nitrate, acetate, or polyester stock, film is transparent. This means that when you hold it up to the light, you will see tiny images in the form of frames. Film has perforations or holes down the side of it. These perforations are used to pull the film through a film projector. Film comes in many different sizes or gauges. It should be wound cyclically around cores or reels and stored in cans that allow for proper air circulation. Videotape. Videotape is a magnetic medium, which requires the use of a tape machine in order to be viewed. The machine reads the surface of the tape and constructs the image that we see on screen. Unlike film, videotape is not transparent, meaning you cannot hold it up to the light and see an image. Videotape comes wound in either an open reel format or in the form of a cassette. A major setback in preserving videotape is locating the correct machine to play the particular tape format that you have. Audiotape. Like videotape, audiotape is a magnetic medium and can be found in an open reel format or in the form of cassettes. For the most part, audiotape is smaller in width than videotape. Audio recordings are also commonly found in the form of discs. Made of vinyl, shellac, or lacquer, these discs have grooves in them. To play such recordings requires use of a record player, whereby a needle runs through the grooves and produces sound. Both audio and video can come in the form of optical disks, like DVD, compact disc, or laserdisc. Discs like these are not recommended for preservation as they can easily break, get scratched, and be affected by changes in temperature. However, you might have important content stored on these formats that you wish to save. Finally, moving images and sounds can be recorded and stored as digital files. Such digital files can be stored on personal hard drives, data, or LTO tapes. They can also be stored on pricey disk arrays or solid-state disk arrays. Digital files can also be stored using cloud storage. While these files can be accessed with a computer, they too are susceptible to damage, corruption, and obsolescence. As such, they must be checked with some degree of regularity.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Um, so when thinking about preserving audiovisual material, as you saw in that video, it helps to know what formats you're dealing with. So let's talk a bit more about the different formats and the unique challenges in preserving them. First, let's talk about the different ways you can categorize audiovisual formats. And you saw some of this in the video. First, you can divide them by media type. Your AV material will either be just audio or sound, or it might be video or moving image, which may or may not include audio as well. So whether you have film or magnetic tape or optical disks or digital files, you might have ones that are audio or ones that are video. That's a pretty straightforward distinction, but it's an important one. Second, you can divide your audiovisual formats by material type. So we have motion picture film, and for each of these, you can see some example formats listed. We have magnetic tape, grooved disks, grooved media, optical disks, and digital files. You can see that most audiovisual material types can be either audio or video, except for grooved disks, which are always audio. Um, Now let's take a closer look at each of these material types and formats. Let's start with a motion picture film. And again, I'd like to rely on a video to introduce some of the basic concepts about film. So let's take a look.
Without any shadow of a doubt, is film? Well, let's break it down and look at its different components. These little cutouts, called perforations, run along the edge of the strip. They provide the camera a way to move the film around easily and accurately to keep an even spacing between images. Some film contains a strip for recording audio from the camera. This is either a magnetic strip or an optical waveform. It's worth noting, though, that when filming motion pictures, audio is recorded to a separate device. Frames are the rectangles that contain the image. And just like how megapixels determine the size of a digital image, the size of these frames impacts how big the image can be printed or projected before it'll lose quality. So the frames, perforations, and audio strips are often rearranged to make space for a bigger image. Super 8 film, in comparison to standard 8mm film, for example, shrinks the perforations on the edge to make space for a larger image across the width of the stock. But there's also the tried and true, just make it bigger approach to film stocks. 16mm is the next size up, with standard 16 and super 16 being the popular formats, although both are actually shot on the same single perf film. 35mm is probably the most notable film. It's the standard for Hollywood as well as the size of the film in those little canisters that you buy for still photography. But while the size is the same, they're both different formats. 70mm film is the largest available film stock for the biggest of the big screens. You'll note that this IMAX 70mm film runs horizontally rather than vertically, because turning the frame sideways is a more efficient layout than vertical, meaning the extra space can be spent on making the frames even larger. Now, while there are many different sizes and configurations of film, modern film stock all works the same way. The film itself is composed of several different layers of filters, barriers, and light-sensitive emulsions, but I'm going to boil it down to just its two main parts. The key to what makes film work is a light-sensitive coating on the film composed of tiny little grains of silver halide. When struck by light, these grains change from one state to another. When developing film that's been exposed in a camera, a chemical bath removes only the grains that have been changed by interaction with light. And the more grains that get removed from an area, the whiter that area will become. And the more grains that get left behind, the darker that part of the image will be. Now, this is fine for plain old black and white film, but to record color we'll need 3 of these light-sensitive layers. Each of these layers will be sensitized to only react with light of a single color. So we'll need 1 blue, 1 green, and 1 red layer, all still a color image. This is a really cool topic by itself, stitched together in a flexible, transparent material. In the early days, this was a nitrocelluloid, but this proved to be explosive. I mean, it's literally chemically related to gun cotton, an early military-grade explosive. This made the safer acetate celluloid films a much welcome creation, although with the silver halide, it still technically is flammable. Acetate-based film stocks were around for a good portion of the century before film manufacturers began to favor polyester plastic as a base, starting in the 1990s. And there you have it. All these components working together create the height of image capturing technology of the 20th century. And while other technologies of its era have either been upgraded or replaced by newer technologies, film has survived relatively unchanged. And even more impressively, while more and more movies are being produced without any shadow of a doubt,
sorry for skipping over a little bit of a portion of that video. It wasn't so relevant as the end there, which I wanted to make sure to play. So next I wanted to here just show you a basic film inspection setup. Now that, hopefully you have a better idea of some of the basics of motion picture film. And here's an example of our setup at California Revealed. That we are not necessarily encouraging memory labs to set up a film inspection station and inspect each film before digitization. But if such a setup does fit within your budget and space, it would certainly be ideal to be able to do that and really see what's on the film. A lot of times you might think you have something that you want to digitize, but it ends up being something that really is not relevant, or you might see some condition issues. It is helpful to be able to take a look at the film. Some of the material that you will need are film rewinds, which you can see here are drilled into this wooden board, or you can direct them, attach them directly to a table. You'll need a light source, which you can kind of view the film through, and a loop here that will kind of magnify that film image. These should be enough to let you take a peek at the film, assess its condition, figure out what type of film it is, whether it has sound, etc. But if you wanted to go further, you could get splicers, leader, cleaning supplies, and other things that would help you actually make some physical repairs to the film to get it ready for digitization. Of course, all of this will take some training, and I will share some resources for that in the documentation as well. California Revealed does have a portable film inspection kit available to be borrowed, and I'm also happy to share information on what to purchase and where to find that material for those who are interested in putting together their own film inspection setup. Here I've summarized some of the information that we just learned and reviewed during the video. There are three major pieces of information needed to describe any particular piece of motion picture film in your collection. At the most basic level, you want to record the gauge, which is basically the width of the film measured from edge to edge and expressed in millimeters. 35 millimeter was the most often used in professional productions and commercial theatrical exhibition. The film gauge that is most frequently found in our archives, libraries, and museums is 16 millimeter, which Kodak introduced in 1923 as a safe, non-flammable alternative for the home and educational markets. Another common gauge in libraries and people's home collections are 8 millimeter films, which are often called regular 8 millimeter, introduced by Kodak in 1932 for home movie makers primarily. Super 8 millimeter was later introduced about 40 years later than regular 8 in the 1960s, and it greatly expanded over the quality of regular 8 millimeter film while keeping the same small and portable size of the film and camera. You'll most likely encounter small gauge films at your memory lab, which are 60 millimeter, regular millimeter, and 8 millimeter, not so much 35. As you saw in the video, each strip of film is composed of a base layer, which is the plastic, and which is most of the actual physical side of the film. And then there is the emulsion layer, which is either black and white in color or color, depending on the type of film stock that you have. Over the years, manufacturers have used three different types of transparent plastic for the film base, which is nitrate, acetate, and polyester. And each of these have their own characteristics. Films often have information printed on the edges indicating the type of film-based plastic used. And you can see in the bottom picture, this is the simplest way to determine the type of film base. Nitrate indicates a nitrate base, or alternatively, safety can indicate that the film is not nitrate. So it is either acetate or polyester if it says safety. Moving on. There are other types of information printed on the edges of film that may indicate the film's date. Edge codes vary according to the manufacturer of the film stock. Some film manufacturers like Kodak, when they initially manufactured the raw film stock, marked the edges with these different shapes like triangles, circles, and squares. And any particular combination of these denoted a particular date. So films manufactured in 1934 by Kodak had an edge code of plus circle. This is the date that the film was manufactured. So it will not necessarily tell you when the film was shot, but it will tell you that, if it was manufactured in 1934, it couldn't have been shot any earlier than that. And it was shot not too long after that. So it gives you a general idea of the date. The next few slides, I wanted to show examples of some major film element types, which is considering digitization projects. The film element that captures the image in the camera when you're recording it is the negative. You can see both color and black and white negative film examples here. The negative is developed and printed after it's been exposed in the camera to make a positive film for projection. The main way to tell color negative film is with the orange color that you see here, and also just the fact that the colors are inverted from natural colors, like the natural human skin and hair colors that might be visible in that specific photo. A black and white negative film won't have the orange hue, but you can still see the inverted whites and blacks in the image in the middle there. Okay, moving on to positive film. Here you can see example of positive film prints, which are created from the negative film that was shot in the camera. Basically, when you shine a light through the negative, it results in a positive image that you print on a different strip of film that is laid next to the negative. And this positive film print is what you project or use to project, still there are some places that do, but generally not. So in a sense, the negative is the preservation element, and the print, the positive print, is the access element in the motion picture film world. Positive prints have transparent edges and could be either silent or with a soundtrack. These two examples, as you can see, have a variable area soundtrack, these squiggly lines on the left side of the films. And film prints with soundtracks like these are also known as composite prints. So what people project in movie theaters are or have for the last many decades are called composite prints. You can see an example of a very type of color fading in the film on the left here. And these are likely a common film elements that you'll encounter at your memory lab. Oops, sorry, skipped a couple of slides there. Going back, there we go. The next film element type I wanted to highlight are reversal films. Here you can see the difference between reversal film with a black edge and a positive print, which we saw earlier, which has a clear edge. Both prints and reversal films have positive images as opposed to negative, and both can be projected and viewed. The difference is in how they are created and also in the transparent versus the black edges. When you see reversal film, it is likely that these are camera original films, meaning they were recorded, the piece of film that was recorded in the camera originally. They use a special photographic process where the film that was in the camera is developed to become a positive image, while normally we saw that that film in the camera is a negative image. And this is the reason, the special photographic process is the reason that you have the black edges. These are likely also to be very common in a memory lab setting because many home movies and amateur works were shot using reversal film stock. Okay, so let's talk a bit about film digitization. Um, Film is digitized using film scanners. At the most basic level, there's a digital camera that takes a picture of every frame of film as the frame is transported through the scanner. As mentioned, each motion picture film is composed of a series of frames, and think of these as individual still images, which is exactly what they are. And the same idea as you're digitizing still images with digitizing motion picture film. The difference is that the software on the computer that is connected to the scanner stitches those individual still images together into a digital file. And on your computer, you have a video file, which is basically a digital manifestation of that piece of film. Several important things to consider about film scanning are what resolution should your film be scanned at? Current best practices suggest that film should be scanned at 4K or 2K depending on the film gauge and element. Generally, films with higher gauges have more image per area of frame and so should be scanned at a higher resolution. And films closer to the original camera element, such as negatives, should be scanned at a high resolution since they are of higher quality. 2K scans are likely sufficient for 8mm and Super 8mm film, but 4K scans are preferred for 16mm and 35mm film. When digitizing film, you also want to decide what type of digital file you want to create. And you can see some of the types of files you can create in this process listed here. I've learned that many memory labs plan on using the Wolverine film scanner, which is pictured above. And I wanted to make sure to note that I've personally never worked with a Wolverine machine, but I did look over the specifications of the types of files it creates, and there are some limitations. One is that it only scans Super 8 and 8mm films, and it does not scan sound. Or does not record sound, rather. And second is that the quality and type of files that it creates are not ideal for capturing the full quality of motion picture film images. So while this is not an ideal machine for film preservation, it does create adequate access files, and I don't want to discourage people from using this machine if it is the best available option. I think best practices are a spectrum, and scanning these films in some capacity is much better than not doing anything at all because you don't have a $30,000 scanner. Okay, so we talked a lot about film. Let's talk some about magnetic media. Magnetic media, as you can see, we can categorize it in several different ways. One is by media type. This is simple. Are we talking about audio tape or videotape? Magnetic media could either record video, like VHS tapes and mini DV, or they can record only audio, like audio cassettes that we used to play in our cars, or reel-to-reel quarter-inch audio tape. Next, we can divide magnetic media based on their physical type. Is the tape enclosed in a cassette, like VHS and audio cassettes, or is the tape in an open reel, similar to motion picture film reels? Generally, open reel formats are older technology, more rapidly degrading, and more expensive to digitize, so they are a higher priority for digitization than cassette-based tapes. Lastly is whether the audiovisual information on the tape is recorded as an analog signal or as a digital signal. I know it's probably quite complicated to think of a piece of tape holding digital information, But that is how some more modern tape formats like mini DV and digital audio tape work. While they are physical objects that require playback decks to be played, the information on the tape is still a collection of ones and zeros, or rather a digital signal. This is important because digital tapes are generally easier to preserve than analog tapes. And we'll talk about this a bit more later. The most common formats of magnetic media you'll encounter at your memory labs are audio cassettes, VHS, and mini DV. Let's talk a bit about what magnetic tape actually is and how it records audiovisual information, which is completely different than motion picture film, and in fact, much more complicated. As you can see, magnetic tape consists basically of this top coat layer, which is the binder layer, and in that layer you have these magnetic particles and lubricant suspended, and then you have this substrate layer, which is the thicker plastic backing. Generally, so what happens when you record on a tape is as it goes through the video recorder, these magnetic particles rearrange themselves to have a basically a magnetic representation of the image and the sound. You know, obviously the technology is much more complicated, but those particles on any particular piece of recorded tape are unique, and that's what makes the image and sound what it is. And when you play that tape back, you know, that's the information that's being played back and viewed on a monitor and potentially digitized. So just wanted to kind of give you a sense of the physical nature of videotape in this slide. Magnetic tape is susceptible to several different kinds of deterioration that can make the playback and digitization impossible after a while. Even when tapes are kept in the most ideal storage condition, they can suffer from deterioration as they age. The term that has been coined to describe this issue is the magnetic media crisis, which is the idea that we only have a couple of decades to digitize or reformat all of this magnetic media because of their rapid degradation and their obsolescence of the formats. There is also the fact that the playback equipment, you know, the decks for these formats are also deteriorating and becoming increasingly difficult to repair and maintain because few specialized technicians are available that know how to do that repair work, and no new decks are being manufactured and no new parts are being manufactured. So, you know, just like an automobile that is very, very old and the parts are becoming rare and rare and people know how to repair them less and less, exact same thing going on with these decks. Here it's even more dire because the technicians are not necessarily passing on their knowledge in a systematic way to other generations, as there is no kind of concrete educational system in place to accomplish that particular goal. Because of this crisis, we basically need strategies for mass digitization if we are to avoid the massive loss of this media over the next few decades. And one reason that I really like the Memory Lab project is because it greatly contributes to mitigating this crisis by helping community members digitize their fragile and deteriorating magnetic tapes through public library services. Here, I wanted to share this video from MePops in Seattle, which lays out some of the challenges of preserving magnetic media that we talked about. This is a good reminder in this video that when you see signs of videotape deterioration in tapes coming through your memory lab, to not play them back on your decks and instead have it arranged to have the tapes cleaned or repaired by professionals, since playing bad tapes can damage your decks permanently. So let's take a look.
Sticky Shed Syndrome.
Sticky Shed Shahed syndrome is a condition created by deterioration in the binders of magnetic audio and video tapes. The binder is the adhesive that holds the thinner back coating onto the back side of the magnetic tape. It can break down over time due to the absorption of moisture. A symptom of this breakdown includes the growth of a white crystallized mold along the tape. The tape will leave rusty or dusty particles on the tape guides and heads inside the players. This can be immediately obvious when the tape is playing due to slowing down or sluggish behavior. The playback image will contain artifacts such as audiovisual dropouts or head clogs caused by the sticky shed gunking up the heads and blocking the image on the tape. Tapes infected with sticky shed syndrome will smell like dirty gym socks or cheap candle wax. Baking temporarily restores the tape by driving the water molecules from the binder, causing the mold to dry up and slough off of the tape, and allowing for a chance to capture it to a digital format. After baking, the tape will remain in playable condition for about 3 days before the sticky shed will begin to regrow. Tapes are baked in a food dehydrator for 48 hours at 125 degrees Fahrenheit. After this, the tapes are allowed to cool for 2 hours before they can be played and captured. This is just one of the many factors contributing to the magnetic media crisis.
Now let's review a couple of basic pieces of information about magnetic tapes. We are talking about magnetic media, and within that world, we can divide them broadly into audio tapes and video tapes. Audio tapes only have audio on them, like audio cassettes and digital audio tapes. Video tapes have video and audio on them, and potentially also captions and time. Examples of this are VHS and digital videotapes like mini DV. So when we digitize audio and videotapes, the complexity of the files resulting from each will match the complexity of the physical objects. So an audio file will just include an audio stream in the file, but a video file will include a video stream, audio stream, and potentially time code and captions as well. So the point here is that the digitization of videotapes is generally much more complicated than audio tapes, since with audio tapes, you're looking at much simpler resulting digital files. Another important distinction within audio tapes and videotapes is whether your tapes are analog or digital. This is important to know because analog and digital tapes go through completely different workflows for digitization. In fact, with digital tape, digitization is not even an accurate term, as the video and audio on the tape is already in digital form that you only migrate from a tape format to a file format on your computer's hard drive. If anyone is setting up mini DV digitization setups in their memory lab, these should be much different and simpler than VHS digitization setups that we're going to discuss next. The essential components for videotape digitization, like VHS digitization, include a playback deck, whatever you're digitizing. So if it's VHS, you need a VHS deck. If it's a U-matic digitization, you need a U-matic deck. Then you need an audio analog to digital converter, a time-based corrector, a computer, and then the cables that you need to connect them. You can also add some other components depending on your budget, space, and expertise, and to what level you want to, create digital preservation files. But you should be able to digitize tapes with just the essential components. Let's talk a bit more in detail about these different components. Basically, whatever format you are digitizing, first you would need to have the playback deck that was originally manufactured to play that tape for you to be able to digitize that tape. All tape digitization takes place by playing back the tape that you have, and obviously, and playing back that tape in real time. So, you know, if it's a 60-minute tape, you want to digitize it, you have to play that tape in the deck for 60 minutes. It's not like you can fast forward and digitize at the same time. And you know, so you obviously need a couple of things. First is you need to have the tape, and it needs to be in good condition, and it needs to be playable. And secondly, you need the deck, and you need that to be in good shape. It should be clean, and all the mechanical and electronic components should be working. Then you need equipment that can grab the analog signal coming out of the tape deck and transform that analog signal to a digital signal. And this is accomplished by analog to digital converters. So this example on the screen is the best kind of device that I think exists for memory labs as far as an analog digital converter goes. This is the Blackmagic Design Intensity Shuttle, which is not being manufactured anymore, but you can still find it online for, you know, a couple $100 to $300. Basically, you have audio and video that is coming out of your digitization deck, and you feed them into this device, which transforms them into a digital signal, which then is ready to be sent out to your computer. So if we go back to the previous slide, sorry, that's the next slide. If you go back to this slide, you can see that, you know, when you play a tape, you have this line out of the red, yellow, and red, white, and yellow, and the red and white are the audio signals, so one for the right channel, one for the left channel, and the yellow is the video signal coming out of the tape. Out of the tape that is being played back in the deck. So you have these three separate signals coming out, and then you can see here that this analog to digital converter can accept these three signals, the video and then the left and right audio, and then this is what digitizes the analog signal, and out of this right-hand FireWire connection, or it might be a USB connection, you have a cable that connects to your computer, and that's how you get that digital signal onto your computer. When you get an analog to digital converter like this one, it usually comes with a software that you can install on your computer, and that software allows you to set the parameters of the type of file that you produce, and also it lets you control the capture process, like when to start it, when to stop it, etc. That basic functionality. There are also open source softwares that you can use for this digitization process. Before you send the video signal, that yellow signal specifically, that's coming out of your playback deck to the analog to digital converter, you need to send it through a time-based corrector to stabilize it. We don't have time to go through the details of why this step is necessary or what it really does, but basically analog video signals coming out of the tape and the tape deck need to be stabilized using a time-based corrector before going to be digitized via the analog to digital converter. Keep in mind that you don't need to do this for the audio signal, the yellow, the white, and the red coming from the tape, just the video signal. You may be able to find playback decks with built-in time-based correctors, so you don't have to buy this separate device. But it's important to note that these time-based correctors are also not manufactured anymore, so they're becoming increasingly rare and expensive to find and acquire. So let me know if you find one. Once you have your playback deck, your analog to digital converter, and your time-based corrector, and your computer, and you've connected them with the cables, you are ready to digitize. With this setup, you can swap out the VHS deck for a Betacam deck, for a U-matic deck, and you can digitize various formats as long as you have a working deck. Basically, as long as you have the analog to digital converter, time-based corrector, and computer setup, you can change the deck to match the format that you want to digitize. Here, I just wanted to show you a diagram of this process that we just talked about. So you can see you have your playback deck here, the back of your VHS deck, and the signal comes out from the deck. The video from the yellow goes to your time-based corrector, and your audio from the red and the white go to your analog to digital converter directly. Your video from the time-based corrector then is stabilized and then also goes to the analog to digital converter. So then you have all three going in here, and then the signal is digitized using this device, and the digital video and audio signals are sent via one cable into your computer, and you use a software on the computer to create that file, which will pop up on your folder that you designated to pop up, just like a file would pop up in your downloads folder when you're downloading a file. Okay, so that was video. Let's talk a little bit about digitizing audio tapes, like audio cassettes. Very similar to digitizing analog video, with the benefit that you don't have to worry about the complexity of the video signal, since you are only extracting audio. So you don't need a time-based corrector. And I mentioned some of those extra bells and whistles in that first slide about video digitization, like waveforms and vector scopes and monitors. You don't need any of those. For the most basic setup, you just need a playback deck, an analog to digital converter, and a computer. Keep in mind that audio analog to digital converters are different than video ones. They're more widely available in many brands and types. And again, similar to video preservation, your audio outputs from the deck go into your analog to digital converter, and then they go into they become digitized and go into your computer. You can swap out your audio cassette deck for a reel-to-reel player, for any other kind of analog audio player, and use it to digitize that format using the same setup. The next common set of audiovisual formats are optical disks, which are unique in the audiovisual world because they could also hold non-audiovisual material like still images or text documents. Usually the disk will have some writing on it that will indicate whether it's a DVD or audio CD or a data CD. While extracting the files from some optical disks might be as easy as plugging the disk in to your drive, opening the file directory, and copying the files to your computer hard drive, there are some disks, such as DVDs, where the best way to preserve them is actually not doing that, but doing what we call disk imaging. If you think about a DVD or a Blu-ray, you don't just have the movie files or the audio files, you also have menus and chapters and the structural elements that allow you to navigate them. And these should ideally be preserved when you reformat the disks to digital files. With disk imaging, which is not as complicated a process as it sounds, the file that you end up extracting from that DVD will include all of these chapter functions, and it will result in a file in an ISO format. So the file extension will be .iso, and when you click on that file on your computer, it will open just like a DVD would when you put it in your DVD player, and you can navigate a computer. So that's kind of the world of optical disks, a little bit of information on that. Moving on to grooved media, which includes discs made of different material, like vinyl or shellac, and it could also include material of different sizes and shapes, like cylinders, which still have the grooves. So that's what they're called, grooved media. Each type of disc will require particular needle type or stylus to be played back and digitized. And one of the latest advancements in this digitization of disks is the Irene machine, which I highlight in the next video. which I'm not actually going to play for you now, but I just wanted to share it. It's a really cool overview of this technology that can basically help digitize broken records by taking an image of the grooves and creating digital audio files based on just the images of the grooves. Um, now that we've talked about different formats, how do you choose the right digital file format for the digitization process? There is no one size fits all answer. Be aware that what your settings are and what your needs are will determine what type of file you will get. You want to generally save your files in the highest quality and resolution that you can afford and that you can store and that is ideal for your purposes. For preservation, for example, you will want a high quality, high resolution file, and that you would want an uncompressed master file. And you want that file to be captured as is with no corrections or improvements, right? If you're digitizing VHS tape, it's a standard definition file and you don't want to up-res it or increase the resolution to high definition because that's not what that is meant to preserve. It's meant to be preserving exactly the quality of sound and image that that original format presented, which may not be as good looking as digital high definition files of today. Is just a different technology, a different look, different color, different sound. For access file, consider how they will be used generally. We talked about whether they'll be streaming online or passed around on hard drives. So that's important to know what type of computer power you have to play those files. Also generally consider using open source file formats. Open source means the code is freely available and it's not a proprietary system that would be expensive or impossible to get access to if the company that designed that format goes under. If you can't have open source files, go for the most widely adopted file format, which really means the most popular and standardized, like MP4 or MP3, for example, although those are access formats, again, not preservation formats. There are so many file formats out there, and you can see out here on this slide some of the basic recommendations for types of files depending on format. Just like other preservation projects, the creation and preservation of metadata is a crucial part of any audiovisual preservation project. Metadata is defined as any information about the file or the tapes. You can create a separate file with metadata to store with your digital files, or you can embed metadata within the files themselves. When thinking about metadata for audiovisual preservation projects, I find that it helps to divide the metadata into three main categories. One is descriptive information. This is information about the content of the audiovisual material, regardless of the physical format. I know this example is not directly relevant to Memory Lab, but take this as an example. If you think about a movie, let's say the 1933 King Kong, you will have a description of the plot, its title, actors, crew, and none of that information changes whether we are talking about a DVD of the film or a film print, motion picture film print that was shown in theaters in 1933. So in any AV preservation project, you want to have a place built in for this type of descriptive metadata where you record the title, the date of creation, subjects, etc. Next, we have a type of metadata related to the specific physical item that we're digitizing or preserving. Taking our previous example, this set of metadata would be about the physical objects that you are going to watch King Kong on. Is it the DVD? Is it a film print? Is it a VHS, etc.? And for each of these formats, there will be a separate set of metadata to record, like what format film, what condition is it in, its physical location within the archive, what year the DVD was produced, etc. We can refer to this set of metadata as technical metadata. Lastly, we should think about metadata that results from the preservation process. Whether you are digitizing within your institution or working with a vendor, it is important to record information about the specifications of the digital files that you create, their format, checksums, their resolution, and also to record information about the digitization process itself. What types of playback decks were used, what type of computer hardware and software were used, what analog to digital converters were used, and whether there were any issues with the digitization process that will affect the quality of the files. So once the files have been digitized, make sure to have a quality control plan in place to ensure that you ended up with the type of files that you intended to get. There are generally two types of quality control depending on the size of the resulting digital collection. What I refer to here as structural level quality control is any quality control operation that can be done on a batch of files and on how they are organized, as opposed to any quality control action that would require playing back or investigating files on an individual level, like file by file. This is generally how I like to look at the QC of a set of files at California Revealed, starting first by taking some structural QC actions and then moving on to individual QC actions. In the resources document, I will share some free and open source tools that will help with these two different types of QC actions. Listed here are some of these QC actions. For example, spot checking the files is an example of an individual file level QC action where you play back each digital files for a few seconds at the beginning, middle, and end to make sure that the image and sound quality are accurate and that the sound and video are in sync together. Checking the technical specification of the files is an example of a structural level QC action. The idea is that you look inside the files on batch level. There's software that can help you do that. And then you make sure that the resolution, the frame rate, the format of all of the files match what you wanted to have in the beginning. Okay, so we're going to wrap up by talking a bit about digital preservation. So when you've gone through and digitized your audiovisual recordings, the job is not done. Digital preservation is an ongoing process. It used to be that you could have a film negative and you would store it properly in a cold, climate-controlled vault, and it would last for 100 years. That used to be, the extent of audiovisual preservation when motion picture film was really the only format around. And in the digital world, though, there's simply no equivalent to that type of passive conservation and preservation. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is the rapid development of the file formats that digital files exist on. And second is the software and hardware required to view and listen to these digital media files. And also the rapid development of the storage media for the files also is an issue. Basically, if you leave your files on a hard drive for 10 years and don't touch them, you will be dealing with several issues when you come back to that hard drive to see what's on it. One is, will you be able to connect the hard drive to your current computers? Chances are the connections and the cables you need to do that are obsolete, and you might need an adapter of some sort to even connect the drive to the computer. Second is whether after successfully connecting your drive to the computer, will the computer even recognize the drive and allow you to open it and see the files? And third is, even if you open the file directory, can those files actually be played on the playback software on your computer? So again, we need to be constantly aware of the need to change the file formats, migrate them to newer formats, as well as the storage medium, from hard drives to newer hard drives to whatever comes next. And we need to do this if we want these digital files to still be able to be viewed in 100 years. And this is something I think that's important to convey to patrons at Memory Labs, that just because now you have a hard drive with the digital files of these movies doesn't mean that in 10 years this is still good. You kind of have to be aware of needing to keep up and migrate these files. So this is just kind of some general tips that I wanted to close out with about digitization fundamentals. Is basically, it's always important to keep your original films and tapes even after you've digitized them. There's always technology is advancing as far as the quality of digitization. And also, I wanted to mention that if you had the opportunity to upgrade the housing, the containers of your material, like especially with film, if you have metal containers that are rusting, deteriorating, to make sure to replace those with archival plastic that will not deteriorate. And also, don't keep any tapes or films in paper or plastic bags. Always, you want breathable containers. Store films flat and video vertically, and keep a hard copy inventory list with all of your items. Okay, so I think we'll close it now here for questions and answers. Thank you all so much. It was great to do this presentation. I hope it was useful in some way. And Pamela and I are both always available at this contact information to answer any questions, any follow up. We talked about the film kit, the digitization kit. We're always happy to chat about this stuff, and especially if it helps folks set up memory labs and help community members digitize their audiovisual material.
Great. Thank you so much, Shahed.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure.